Old relationship we had with the United States based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation is over. What exactly the United States does next is unclear. But what is clear is that we as Canadians have agency. We have power. We are masters in our own home. Nous sommes maîtres chez nous. We can control our destiny. We can give ourselves much more than any foreign government, including the United States, can ever take away. We can deal with this crisis best by building our strength right here at home. It will take hard work. It will take steady and focused determination from governments, from businesses, from labor, from Canadians. We will need to dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. We will need to pivot our trade relationships elsewhere. And we will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations.
So we have a little bit of breaking news, folks. Canada will not be supporting the United States with military support in any war with Iran. Mark Carney has said that now is the time for diplomacy and getting the relevant parties around the table. Let me just say that again. Canada will not support the United States in use of its own military. Source for this, folks, is CBC. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Love you guys to give me a follow.
That's all, folks.
Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 3. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations to the Akim and her pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachakwadash be upon all your houses. This is the Brother Quanah Watts from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power. Yahweh Bashim El Shah, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. Amen. You know, it is escalating, right, pretty quick, right, between America and Iran, right? That tension, right, is escalating pretty damn quick, man. Again, right, every time, you know, which I said at camp earlier today, every time you turn around or every time, you know, you wake up, right, something happened, right, throughout the night, or you know, you might be running some errands, this and the third, you go, you know, you check your phone and something new is happening, right? More breaking news and more breaking news, again, every time we turn around, right? And now you got Iran basically talking about, you know, closing the Strait of Hormuz, right? As it says right here, this is on the Newsbreak app. It says Iran's parliament votes to close Strait of Hormuz after U.S. attacks, and this is 10 hours ago, man. You know, which is heavy, right? And as we're going to get into in this article, the Strait of Hormuz, right, or the Gulf of Hormuz, as you know, it's said in, you know, different places as I read, is very, you know, very crucial, you know, strait, right? Really for global energy security, man. You know. And again, we're going to get into it a little bit. I want to read a little bit of this article. It's pretty short. It's not long at all. You know, we'll just read a little bit of it. Right? It says, following U.S. strikes on Iran nuclear facilities on Saturday, the Iranian parliament, which, you know, it was 3 different nuclear facilities that America ultimately bombed. One being Fordo, right? A really large one, which, you know, again, now you have Iran basically coming out and saying, you know, that they had emptied that nuclear facility months prior, you know, and then even then the damage that America did really isn't much damage, you know, so they're really, you know, making fun of America, you know, and you know, the attack that America, you know, executed. But they also hit 2 more nuclear facilities, which they're not saying anything about, which is Esfahan as well as Natanz, you know, which is big news as well. And again, that just recently happened, as it says right on Saturday. It says the Iranian parliament has voted has voted in support of closing the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most crucial oil transit choke points, according to media reports. It says any final decision on retaliation, however, will rest with the country's Supreme National Security Council and leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It says the parliament voted merely advises him of the option to pursue. Right? It says Newsbreak has reached out to the White House by email by Sunday. Blah blah blah. But that's all I want to read. Right? Just ultimately saying, hey, they're ultimately looking to close it down. And again, as it says, it's a crucial oil transport choke point. Right now, I ultimately, went to Chat GPT and asked, a string of questions. The first one, right, being what is Iran closing the Gulf of Hormuz? It says Iran has not actually closed the Strait of Hormuz yet, but tensions are running high, right? June 22nd, which I believe is today. Yes, today it says Iran's parliament approved a measure calling for the closure of Strait of Hormuz in response to recent U.S. airstrikes on its nuclear sites, right? It says, however, the decision to close the strait is not final. It still requires approval from Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Analysts stress this move is likely symbolic as the parliament lacks executive power, and any real closure could backfire economically, hurting Iran's own oil experts. Right? It would hurt them, but it would, really would hurt, it would do some damage, right, to America as well, which is one of my questions, right? Right here it says, how would the closure of the Gulf of Hormuz affect America? Right? It says the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would have major consequences for America, but both economically and strategically. Right? Even though the U.S. imports far less oil from the Gulf than in the past, here's a breakdown of the main effects. So the oil prices will spike globally. So the Strait of Hormuz, ultimately, being closed would affect America. It would affect America, right? It says the Strait of Hormuz handles about 20% of global oil trade, 17 million barrels a day. Even a temporary disruption could push oil prices above $100 to $120 per barrel or more, depending on the severity. It says that would lead to higher gasoline prices for U.S. consumers, increased shipping and transport costs, fueling inflation. Right? It says pressure on Federal Reserve policies, delaying interest rates or cuts, raising them again. Though the U.S. is now a net oil exporter, it still trades on the global oil markets. High prices hit all economies, right? So this wouldn't just hit America; it would hit everywhere, It says the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, based in Bahrain, is responsible for keeping the strait open. Any Iranian attempt to close it could trigger naval clashes or airstrikes on Iranian position, making the tensions between America and Iran even worse. Right? It would further, escalate the tension. Right? Then again, the war, right, that is, taking place, and we understand that, America, basically striking Iran, right, is an act of war, striking their nuclear facilities, getting into it with them, Now that was ultimately an act of war, And so Iran ultimately, there was a video of one of the Iranian officials, right? A brother posted in the chat, basically saying that Iran reserves the right to defend itself against America, ultimately implying that they are going to ultimately fight back, man, in many different ways, right? It says a broader regional war involves allies like Israel, the UAE, or Saudi Arabia. It says risk of American military casualties or escalation to open conflict. Economic shockwaves, the market instability would likely rattle stock markets, especially energy and airline sectors, shipping, insurance, and global supply chains, right? So it would affect, America in many different ways. But I want to drop down to the next question. It says, what nation does America get most of their imported oil from, right? And it gives us a list, right? Canada being the number one, which we just watched the video. Canada saying they're not going to be backing America, right, when it comes to, supplying, any kind of military, support, right, to America, right, against Iran, You know, they're saying, no, we're not going to be a part of it. And the first video, I believe, is a little bit older. You know, I think that video came out when, you know, America was ultimately talking about, you know, adding, you know, Canada as a 51st state, making Canada a state, as well as, you know, you know, trying to basically, you know, get them, you know, in line with how America runs, right? Trying to basically run America, you know, or run Canada, right? You know, Trump trying to basically get, you know, attain Canada and run Canada and so on and so forth, you know, which they weren't having it. And I think that's when that video came out. But the other two videos, right, that were on that that collage of videos, right, are recent, you know, again, talking about, you know, Iran, where Canada is not going to be backing America like that, man, you know. So not only would this, you know, allow for America to rely more, because as you see right here, it says Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Colombia, and Iraq, right? Saudi Arabia and Iraq are in, you know, in that area, you know. So then those two avenues of oil, right, will be completely cut off, right? So that would allow for the prices here to go up, you know. It would make, you know, ultimately America, you know, rely solely on, you know, Mexico, Canada, you know, its neighbors, you know, which would be good for them, right? And, you know, could be cheaper, you know, for America, right? Because it's not coming, you know, from so far, right? Which ultimately could, right? It could, you know, help the economy in a sense. And oil, and America, right, produces its own oil, you know, and it would ultimately make America tap into that as well, you know, which again could be good for the economy. But we understand that, you know, the American economy that we had once seen, right, prior to the scamdemic, prior to, you know, prior to, you know, again, you know, the C-19, right, is not going to ever come back, right? Jeremiah, you know, the 51st chapter, right, verses 8 and 9, right? They would heal Babylon, but she is not healed, you know. So there's nothing that you can do to, you know, to bring back that American economy that was once here, where everyone, you know, wasn't necessarily, you know, living from paycheck to paycheck, right? People had, you know, were able to spend money, people were able to do things, right? All that shit is gone now. You know, we're seeing these tensions rise between, you know, the West, right, and these Eastern nations, right, drastically, right, especially with this, the Strait of Hormuz being, you know, threatened to be closed, you know. I don't want to drop down because that's huge, right? Again, you know, America, you know, basically, you know, coming at, you know, Iran, you know, forcing them to, you know, to do something such as closing the Strait of Hormuz. That's going to affect not only America, right, but even America's allies, man. You know, it says, how important is the Gulf of Hormuz to European countries? Because again, America only, when you go and read other articles, right, it tells you that America, you know, 7% of America's imports, right, come from, you know, oil, right, from Saudi Arabia, from, you know, Iraq, right, those countries over there. Only 7%, you know, of America's imports come from, you know, out of that, you know, the Strait of Hormuz. So it really doesn't affect America as much, right? It still will affect America, but it's not going to affect them as much, right? But the European countries, right, they heavily rely on, you know, that oil, right? It says the Gulf of Hormuz is critically important to many European countries, especially for their energy security. Here's why, right? It says why the Gulf of Hormuz matters to Europe. Oil transit choke point, right? Which we read, you know, the very first question, right? It says around 20% of global oil, 17 million barrels per day, passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Many European countries import oil that originates in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, etc. Though not all of this oil is shipped directly to Europe, much of it is routed through global markets. So any disruption affects Europe indirectly via price spikes and supply shifts, right? LNG, liquefied natural gas exports. Qatar a top LNG supplier, ships almost all its LNG exports through the strait. Europe has increasingly turned to Qatari LNG to diversify away from Russian gas, especially after the Ukraine war, right? So they're saying, okay, when this whole thing happened, right, between, Russia and Ukraine, which the European nations ultimately, were trying to get America not to put sanctions on Russia and not to basically aid or finance the war between Russia and Ukraine, right? Especially Germany, France, right? These nations were openly saying, no, we don't want that. But yet America went ahead and did it anyways, which again forced them to, basically shift, and make that shift on who they get their oil from, which is an issue, right? If you're ultimately, you found a system that works for you and it's working in this, that, and the third, it will sometimes ultimately making that shift, right, can affect you drastically, man, right? It might not be for, an extended period of time, but, but that transition, right, you're going to eventually feel, man. Price hikes, right? Let's say the shift, now you got to go to somebody more expensive, right? That's going to hurt your economy as well, man. That's going to drastically hurt the economy because of, again, right, and at one point, it was, Russia basically saying, hey, anybody that's, in bed or with, Ukraine basically attacking, or them going back and forth, right, they cut off oil, right? They cut off that oil, and we saw the UK, Germany, France, Spain, a lot of these nations were affected by that. That whole going back and forth between Russia and America, right? They were telling America not to put any sanctions on Russia because it would affect them, and America did it anyways, right? So then they had to, basically shift, right, their where they get their oil from, which these nations were pissed off at America for doing that. Right. Well, now look at what's going on. Right. These nations understand that, hey, if you go to bat or you get into it with Iran, that's going to affect us because, a lot of these, European countries are NATO members. Right. So if Iran, ultimately attacks America, that would, activate Article 5. Right, which you can look it up. Any NATO member that is attacked, right, by the outside, country, right, that all the NATO countries have to basically go to bat, right, and go to war with that nation that attacked the NATO member, right, which at this point it would be Iran if they ultimately decided to attack America or American, troops, So this isn't a light decision that's going to be, talked about, right? Iran is, basically holding conversation, with Vladimir Putin, right? They're meeting, they're talking, and depending on how these talks go, this could go one of two ways, man. Where they ultimately try to affect America, financially, right? Or they go to war, right? And as of right now, it seems like, that might be the move, right? To ultimately, try to block, America or, and America's allies, right, financially. Right, as America continues to, press the issue, right, with Iran, right. If that issue continues, that's the European countries are going to be heavily and drastically affected, right. It says global market impact, right. Europe buys oil on the global market, meaning any disruption in Hormuz, even if not directly affecting European bond tankers, raises world oil prices. So this is not just going to affect America. It's going to affect everyone, right? It says that translates to higher fuel transportation and industrial costs across the EU. Strategic reserves and dependence. Europe lacks the kind of massive oil and gas reserves that the US or China have. A sustained disruption could force rationing, energy subsidies, or economic slowdowns in major economies like Germany, France, and Italy, right, which are main players within the European economy. It says European countries most affected: Germany, industrial base depends on steady energy imports, high reliance on imported oil. Italy, high reliance on imported oil and gas. Spain, major importer of LNG and oil. Netherlands, key European refining and trading hub. Greece, shipping heavy economy tied to global oil trade, right? So all of these nations, their economies heavily rely, on the Strait of Hormuz being, operational, right? If it closes down, their economies are gonna be drastically hit, which is going to again put pressure on America from these European countries to ultimately calm the fuck down when fighting against Iran, right? Not only is America and Iran's beef gonna lead to, Russia getting into the mix, because again, we have Iran and Russia, in talks, right? Which is the fulfillment of Ezekiel, the 38th chapter in the 7th verse, right? Where it tells you that, Russia will be a guard unto these nations. Right, Russia is going to eventually get into the mix, man. Right, again, according to prophecy. But this is also aiding, right? This is also aiding in, America's allies, right, being put into a position to where they're going to, hate the horde, right? This is according to prophecy, and we're going to grab it, right? We saw it at the end of that video in Revelation 17 and verse 16, right? It's going to heavily affect them, man. It says, what happened? It's the last little bit, right? What happens if the strait closes? Immediate oil and NLG price spikes in Europe. Potentially potential supply shortages for some countries if alternate routes via Egypt, Suez Canal, or pipelines can't compensate. Right? Strategic petroleum reserves in the EU may be tapped to stabilize markets, meaning they're going to eat up their own supply. Right? And as they eat up their own supply, if they're not able to get to another outside source before they eat up their supply, they're going to be fucked. Their economy is going to be fucked completely. And excuse my French, that means it complete and utter disruption. Their economy is going to be at a screeching halt, which is going to destroy them. Right? It says increased military and diplomatic pressure to reopen the strait, meaning it's going to cause further wars. Right? Again, leading to them, right, coming up against America, because America is the one that's starting and pushing the issue, right? Let's go ahead and grab that, that these nations, right, are ultimately, matter of fact, we'll jump here in Jeremiah, that these nations are ultimately going to be, coming at America for the decisions that America is doing, right, as well as, Israel, right, because they're ultimately one and the same, right along with Ukraine. Right, America is backing Israel and Ukraine financially, as far as delivering weapons to Ukraine, to Israel, to fight against these nations that they're fighting against. These other nations are getting tired of this shit, man. Even America's allies, right? It says, Jeremiah 50 and verse 9, it says, "For lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country." Now that north country is speaking on Russia. Right, Gog and Magog, the land of the Gogites, right, of the land of Magog. Talking about the modern day Russians, right? That the land of Magog, right? Used to belong to the Japhites, right? Before Esau came in there and took that land, right, and named that land after himself, as we know that this damn devil, right, has a history of doing. Right, Habakkuk the 2nd chapter tells you that he keepeth not at home, but heapeth unto himself all nations. Right, this is what this damn devil did, and now see again, right, he took that land, and so it's ultimately talking about the Edomites that are over there, right, the Russians, right, that's that north country, right, but it says an assembly of great nations, and we understand that Iran is one of Russia's #1 allies, right, as we read in Ezekiel the 38th chapter. Right, Persia, Ethiopia, right, China and Russia been talking. North Korea has already sent troops to aid Russia in the war against Ukraine. Right, so there's many of these different nations that ultimately hate America, hate Israel, that are allied with Russia. But see, it's not going to stop there. Certain of the decisions and events that America is ultimately going to, execute are going to be in favor only of itself and not of its allies, right? Which is ultimately going to, make it to where, America's allies, start to look at America like, hey, like what the fuck is going on? Which we've seen that happen, you know? And now as it continues, they're going to be drastically affected by this decision of closing the Strait of Hormuz if it takes, right? If it ultimately goes and they do close that strait, you know, because again, really, there's only really two decisions, man. It's either you try to affect America financially, right? And try to beat America financially, right? Because Iran trying to basically go head on with America, right? Iran would lose, you know? Iran would drastically lose, man, right? And America, the American dollar still has power, still has reign, right, over these, you know, different currencies of these nations, man, right? So America still is that top dog, but we understand and we see that America is declining, right? America's back, right, is against the wall, and usually when you put a dog, right, a dog's back against the wall, and he has nothing to do but to fight, you know, he can't do nothing but fight, you know, so they don't want to push America into a corner, you know, because again, they still benefit, right, to a certain degree, right, from the, you know, American economy, you know. So they're ultimately, you know, they kind of, okay, well, we can't take them on, right? We'll ultimately affect them financially. Closing the Strait of Hormuz would ultimately, again, affect, you know, America, right? Very little, but it would affect America's allies drastically, right? Which is, again, if America continues to press that button, it will make it to where America's allies will turn against them, right? If they continue to fight against Iran, they continue to fight against, you know, Russia and Ukraine, right? America hasn't openly came up against Russia in Ukraine, right? But they, again, they you know, they finance and send weapons to Ukraine to fight against Russia, you know, a proxy war, if you will, you know. So the Assembly of Great Nations is going to include America's allies, right? Let's jump to this and we'll come back and finish it, right? Revelations 17 and verse 16, it says, and the 10 horns, right, which thou sawest upon the beast, and these is going into the EU countries, man, right? These vassal states, right, of America, man, right? Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, you know, so on and so forth, Belgium, Poland, right? All these different, you know, European Union countries, right, are eventually going to do what, right? It says right here, these shall hate the whore, which the whore would be, you know, Babylon the Great, the virgin daughter of Babylon, right? That whore, right? It says, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Meaning they're going to be sending over those nuclear missiles, man. Meaning they're going to be turning against America. They're going to side with whoever is against America, right, or currently is against America, and they're going to shoot those missiles off as well, right? Which is, we read that in Jeremiah, again, 50 and verse 9. We'll start at the top again. It says, for lo I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon, right, which modern day Babylon is America, right? It says, an assembly of great nations from the north country, they shall set themselves in array against her, right? Meaning saying, I'm against you. I'm not with you. I don't condone nor co-sign on the things that you're doing, right? They're going to look at America and say, fuck no. No, we not with you, right? Let's grab this in Obadiah. We'll come back. Actually, I want to grab it in the NLT if I could. Obadiah and verse, what is that, verse 7? Right here, verse 7 in the NLT, it says, all your allies will turn against you. They will help to chase you from their land. They will promise you peace while plotting to destroy and deceive you. Your trusted friends will set traps for you, and you won't even know about it. Right? So it's going to turn these nations against America, and then they're going to start plotting. Right? They're going to start plotting. They're going to start moving in a way where they're like, no, we don't want to, you know, add you into our plans, which we saw that, right, when America ultimately started, you know, and yelled at Ukraine, the Ukrainian president Vladimir Zelensky, right? What happened? France and the rest of the EU, they're like, no, man, we're gonna ultimately issue a nuclear protection clause, or whatever you want to call it, right? And America wasn't even included in it. These nations were moving, right, in a direction without America. Right, this is what we've been seeing the last few years, right, taking place, right, the fulfillment of this prophecy in Revelations, right, the 17th chapter, the 16th verse, as well as this verse as we're reading right now, right? Jeremiah 50 and verse 9, right? As it says right here, and halfway through the verse, it says, and they shall set themselves in array against her, against America, right? Again, not only America's enemies, right, our current enemies, but even America's allies, right? It says, from thence she shall be taken. Their arrows shall be of a mighty excrement, and none shall return in vain. These nations are going to be shooting these ICBM nuclear missiles towards America, and they're not just going to go away. They're not just going to, you know, as soon as you shoot them, you got America in these movies and shit like that they're just going to be able to shoot down the missiles. And I think they had one in Wonder Woman, right? The new Wonder Woman that came out, right, with the latest one. With that Israeli Gadol Gadot or whatever her name is, Gail Gabbett, whatever her name is, that near the end they had shot off all those nuclear missiles, but you know, she defeated, you know, whatever, the little villain, and then all the missiles started exploding, right? None of them touched down. That's not gonna happen, right? That's a fucking fantasy, man, right? These nuclear missiles are gonna hit their mark, and we know that as we read in Joel, the 2nd chapter. Right? Joel chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, blow ye the trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. And this is what we're doing, right? We're blowing the trumpet, right? Warning the masses of the things that are coming and these different events that are happening, filtering them through the scriptures and letting you know, hey, we're in the time of the fulfillment of, you know, World War III, right? We're in the time where America's allies are going to turn on them, right? Based off the decisions that America makes, right? And ultimately side with America's enemies and shoot these nuclear missiles on them, man. And again, right, this is all speculation, man, right? The scriptures tell you, right, what ultimately is going to happen, right? You know, as far as major events, but it didn't tell you, right, the little events that lead up to that, right? At this point, it's speculation, man, right? That this is, if this continues, this is what can come of it, you know? Either way, prophecy is going to be fulfilled, no matter how it takes place, or no matter how the buildup looks. Prophecy is going to take place. America's allies will turn against America, side with America's enemies, and destroy America via ICBM nuclear missiles, man. Right? Scriptures say we know in part, we prophesy in part. You know, we just tell you very well, right? You know, looking up, you know, economies, understanding, you know, economies and understanding, right? You know, certain, you know, aspect of how the world works, you know, in a sense to where you're like, okay, if this happens, this is how, you know, this is how it's going to affect America, right? This is how it's going to affect, you know, America's allies and so on and so forth. And this is what it can lead to via prophecy, you know? But it says, let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh cometh, for it is nigh at hand. And this is exactly it, right? We just read it. At the end it shall speak and not lie, though it tarry. Wait for it, because it will come. It will surely come. It will not tarry. We're around the corner of this taking place, man. Right? Verse 2, it says, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong. There hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. And this is talking about those nuclear missiles being dropped down, right? Destroying everything, man. Right? It says, a fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth, right? Which is ultimately going into the destruction that they're going to bring, and then the fire that ultimately is propelling them, right, to their destination, right? It says, and behind them a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. Nothing shall escape the destruction of these ICBM nuclear missiles once these nations shoot them off, right? It says the appearance of them is as the appearance of horses, and as horsemen they shall run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap. Now, a regular arrow, right, from a bow, right, is not going to be able to go from one mountain to the next, right, one country to the next. That's not going to fucking happen. You know, that's impossible. You know, so it has to be a missile. It has to be a nuclear missile, right? It says, like the noise of a flame of fire, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, and as a strong people set in battle array. Before their face the people shall be much pained, and all faces shall gather blackness. Right? It's going to bring forth fear. These people are going to be scared, right? When they start to hear these sirens, and you see these videos from Iran, from Israel and whatnot, people being scared, man, from Gaza, from Palestine, when Israel was firing on them, right? People were fucking scared, screaming, yelling, you know? It says, they shall run like mighty men, they shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march everyone on his way, and they shall not break their ranks. Meaning, once they get shot off their destination, they're going straight to that destination. They're not going to veer off. They're not going to sit there and be like, fuck, I got to run this errand real quick. You know what I mean? I got to go. No, fuck that, man. It's an ICBM nuclear missile, and it was created to destroy. Isaiah 54 verse 16. It had created the smith that bloweth the coals in the fire, right? That created that waster to destroy, which is the ICBM nuclear missiles, roughly paraphrasing, right? Neither shall one thrust another. They shall walk everyone in his path, and when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. You're not going to be able to shoot them down, right? You're not going to be able to shoot these missiles down, man. When they get shot off, they're going right there, and they will hit. The Lord is going to ultimately protect these missiles, right, to be able to reach their destination, right, to fulfill prophecy, right? It says, they shall run to and fro in the city. They shall run upon the wall. They shall climb upon the houses. They shall enter in at the windows like a thief, right? It's going to be so fast too, man, you know, because you got a nuclear missile that can go from Russia all the way to America, right? 15 minutes. That's fucking fast as shit. Bro, we're talking about, I think it was Mach 21, like 19,000 miles per hour. Russia is not no 19,000 miles away from America, man. So it ain't gonna take no hour. You know, you look at it, you know, I think from America to Alaska is like 2,000 miles or some shit like that, right? And then Russia and Alaska they have a 400, I think it was like 400 mile separation. If I'm not mistaken, a little less than that, man. You can walk from Alaska to, you know, to Russia. It might be like a day or two trip. I'd have to look it up, man. But I know it's close, right? When the water freezes, bro, you can literally walk across, you know. And I don't think it's that far, man. You know, a day walk, a day and a half walk, 2 day walk. You know, which ain't fucking far. You know, so hey, think about that, man. If they put a missile near that border and shoot it off, we're talking like not even 30 minutes, 20, like 10, 15 minutes. That's fucking close as shit. At 19,000 miles per hour, if not faster. Obliteration, man. Right? And it's gonna happen to where when they shoot it off, it's gonna beat their response when they get that fucking you know, the mayday, if you will. You know, the sirens or the notification that, hey, they got a fucking nuclear missile coming, right? And not just one, it's gonna be multiple. Scriptures talk about 200,000, man, which is 200 million nuclear warheads that are gonna be shot off and explode here in America, right? Which is over fucking kill, right? Which is why it says the earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. Because you're gonna have that mushroom cloud that's gonna go up, right? And it's gonna cover, oh man, it's gonna be fucking a complete and utter obliteration. You know, America's not gonna be able to defeat that, man. Right? Verse 11, it says, and Yahweh shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great, for he is strong that executeth his word, for the day of Yahweh is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? And America's not going to be able to abide it, man. America's going to be destroyed, you know. And I'll grab one more preset, man, and we'll get out of here. Let me highlight this real quick. Right? This is going into Isaiah, the 34th chapter. Again, just telling you, hey, once those missiles get shot off, hey, that's it. America's gonna be destroyed, right? right here. We'll start at verse 8. It says, "For it is the day of Yahweh's vengeance, and the year of recompense for the controversy of Zion," right? Because we understand that Esau, Edom, right, as well as these other nations, but mainly Esau, Edom, right, has ultimately committed great trespass, right, and great offenses, right, against, the Lord's chosen people, which are the Israelites. Today will be the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, as well as you have Israelite foreigners, right, Israelites that look like, the other nations, right, have been scattered into these other nations, right, according to Deuteronomy 28th chapter, and throughout time began to look like these nations, So you have Israelites all across the world, right, and no matter where we're at, the curses follow us, right? So we're treated like shit. We're treated as the worst fucking nation. We are considered the worst nation in the world by the rest of these heathens, right? Again, but especially by Esau, Edom, and all the mistreatment that we've received from that damn devil, man. He's gonna have to pay for that, and it's gonna be by way of him being taken out of power. Yahweh Shai coming and taking him out of power and destroying his world, his cash cow, which will be America, right? It says, "And the streams thereof shall be turned into pitch, and the dust thereof into brimstone, and the land thereof shall become burning pitch." Let's talk about America, right? That lake of fire, when you read in Revelations, the 15th chapter, right? You got the elect standing on that sea of glass mingled with fire. That fire being what? America burning, which is the lake of fire, right? It says, "It shall not be quenched night nor day. The smoke thereof shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. None shall pass through it forever and ever." Right? America will be a complete and utter desolation for all eternity. Right? It says, "But the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it. The owl also and the raven shall dwell in it. And he shall stretch out upon it the line of confusion and the stones of emptiness." Meaning you're not going to be able to tell where Los Angeles was. You're not going to be able to tell where Texas was. You're not going to be able to tell where Arizona, New York, Montana, Wyoming, Michigan, Detroit, Florida. You're not going to be able to tell where it was. It's just going to be a complete and utter destruction, man. Right? Even we're talking about even the border, right? The coastlines and everything like that. All that shit's going to change. It's just going to be a complete and utter fucking destroyed plain dunes. Right? It says, "They shall call the nobles thereof to the kingdom, but none shall be there, and all her princes shall be nothing." Nobody's going to live here. Everybody's going to be destroyed. It says, "And the thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brimbles in the fortress thereof, and it shall be an habitation of dragons, and a court for owls. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The screech owls also shall rest there and find herself a place of rest." Right? It says, there shall the great owl make her nest and lay and hatch and gather under her shadow. There shall the vultures also be gathered, everyone with her mate." So this is telling you only, desert creatures, right, are going to dwell there, man. Only the animals, the creatures are going to be here in America, man. You ain't going to have no humans, no nothing, man. Right? You're not going to have these skyscrapers still here. You ain't going to have the apartments, the houses, the cars, as you see in apocalyptic movies. No, all this shit's going to be destroyed, right? Pursuant to 2 Peter 3:10, right? "All the works therein shall be burnt up," right? Everything's going to be destroyed, man. And this is something we can't wait for, man. We can't wait till Yahweh Shem Shah ultimately get rid of this place, man, right? Because this is the place where wickedness, right, is at an all-time high, right? Higher than any other place in the world. Right, as you read in Amos 9:8, right, all the eyes of the Lord are upon the sinful kingdom, which is America, and America has spread nothing but wickedness and evil across the world, but we're in a time where Yahweh Shem Shai is going to destroy this place, man, called Lord Yahweh Shem Shai, but with that, Lord will, is edifying, Lord will, straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Ba'Hashem Yahushua, Ba'Hashem Ruach HaKodesh, that belongs to the elder apostles, the bishops, the great millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.